Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up, our military we celebrate for centuries of history. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Good evening, and welcome to the Heritage Month Heritage Book Review and Roundtable. Our book reviews are an annual event for this celebratory month. It is a fantastic opportunity for us to discuss works from local Barbadian authors and people that live within the Barbadian community who are writers and who are capturing day-to-day life in Barbados. Whenever we hear about books in Barbados, we always start to think back to the established writers, the late Kamal Brathwaite, the late George Lammon, and we never ever think of those who are currently writing and capturing Barbados as we know it in the late 20th century and the early 21st century. Just now I mentioned a dear friend who I would have met as a young cultural officer at the National Cultural Foundation, as well as worked very closely in his latter years at the UWI, Professor George Lammon, who would have passed away just 4 days before his birthday last week. Professor Lammon was a prolific writer, essayist, and political thinker. And I'd like us to just take one moment as we reflect upon him. May he rest in peace, and may he continue to be a scribe in the sky. This evening, as we celebrate Heritage Month for perhaps the 11th year, persons always ask why we are celebrating Heritage Month. Heritage Month came about in 2012 to commemorate the inscription of historic Bridgetown and its garrison. We see the signs around in the outer skirts of town and throughout the garrison, but have you ever taken a moment to think about its significance? One thing we want to do is to celebrate what is Barbadian historically in our heritage. And there's always sometimes some discussion about what is heritage and how do we capture heritage, its tangibility, its accessibility, and what does it mean, especially when we think of ourselves living in the modern age. This webinar, as I did say, speaks to writings of persons who live and walk amongst us. And it also is engaging writers themselves who, throughout this way, are giving us advice and things of what we should read and what we should look out for when we go into the next bookshop. This evening, we have with us 4 fantastic creative artists, and their skill set is in libretto and is in, so trust me, when they tell you something about a work, it is the work that when you go into town tomorrow, because it's Friday, and you know how Barbadians love town on Fridays, you need to specifically look for these books on your shelves. But don't take my word for it. We're going to listen to what they have to say about some 4 fantastic local titles you need to look out for. With us this evening, we have Miss Kay Hall, Education and Community Outreach Officer of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Mr. Robert Edison Sandiford, author and editor of Arts, etc. Dr. Zoan Evans, author instructor at the UWI Cave Hill campus. And Mr. Joshua Clark, concept artist and illustrator. The Art of Joshua Clark. They each have chosen 4 titles to which they will give review, an explanation, and make it all very exciting for us. Kay loves Hard Years by Matthew Clark and Nigel Lynch. Robert would have edited the Arts, etc. NIFCA Winning Words Anthology 2019 2020. Zoanne has selected The Best of Carl Seeley, and that's Carl with a K. Thank you. And Joshua Clark cheekily has selected And Sometimes They Fly by Robert Edison Sandiford. I'm going to turn the floor over to them so they can tell us more about that title. And please share your comments, ask your questions if there's anything that you think that they have missed specifically that you would like to find out more about, because I want these books to go off the shelves, especially for the month of June and for summer reading. Kay, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Um, my review of Hard Years is on a quite interesting happening, really. I review books for the museum's bookshop before they go on the shelves. And that is how I came across Hard Years by Michael Clark and Matthew Lynch. And I'm not the type of person that goes in for what we would ordinarily call, our comic books. Um, and that's what I would more or less dismissively call them. But what this really is a graphic novel, and a very good one, um, which I am ashamed to admit I might not have read were it not for my position. So, as the focal point for tangible cultural heritage at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, I was really quite pleased to come across this exciting new graphic novel by Matthew Clark and Lynch, which incorporates so many aspects of those parts of our heritage and culture which we may not be able to touch, but which we see and feel and live pretty much every day. A lot of our culture is encapsulated in our language and in our beliefs and our continuous practices. So we really don't often think about it very much. And therefore we don't recognize it for what it is and for what for its cultural value. When we drink some bush tea for our bad feels, or go liming or fetting with our friends, or we cannot live without our pudding and sauce on a Saturday, we are expressing elements of that living culture and therefore retaining and safeguarding our intangible cultural heritage by keeping it alive. So Matthew Clark now and Nigel Lynch have gone one step further by incorporating several elements of our ICH into their literary work in a way which is both recognizable and appealing to a broad cross-section of our society. It retains historic elements and personalities such as Mr. Harding and Sam Lord and Rachel Pringle, with which the elder members of our society are instantly and intimately familiar as cultural markers, as well as creating an enticing fantasy world with which our younger members of our society, who are steeped in a broader worldview and ethos, can learn to connect and appreciate with our Indigenous heritage and culture. It creates a world which is almost entirely derived from our history, heritage, and mythology, where the now extinct Barbados raccoon rubs shoulders with the traditional folk creatures like shaggy bears and spiritual elements like duppies, and flight have merged with minibuses and ZR vans to create futuristic flight travel, which is still somehow steeped in all the liveliness and passion that we associate with public transportation in contemporary Barbados. In the world of Clark and Lynch, disputes are solved by stick licking and other martial arts, and the landship is not only the friendly society lending financial and other aid to our communities in times of personal trial and distress, with which our parents and our grandparents have grown up, but also a true military force to be reckoned with, harnessing the psychic power of the drum and the dance to protect and advance our society from external threats which would deprive us of what we hold dear, our very essence and our identity as a people, our vibes, and even our very lives. Metaphor of the vibes as a way to represent our significant character in essence, who we are deep down as people, is an excellent way of visually signaling to us, the readers, the constant threats we are under to safeguard our culture and heritage from the things which would, to coin a popular phrase, steal our joy. These threats are much the same as what we face every day. They include the physical and economic challenges experienced as a result of storms and hurricanes, and also the socio-political incursions by those who would take advantage of our small island vulnerabilities through neocolonialism, which replaces our indigenous systems, which we've come to depend upon. Indigenous systems, such as our local agricultural practices, are challenged by the introduction of alternative systems of sustenance and advancement, which, like Harding's factories in the book, nonetheless deprive us to ever increasing degrees of our heritage and culture by forcing us to move away from what we know and that which sustains us, not just physically and economically, but intellectually and psychologically, thus forcing us to survive according to their needs and requirements rather than our own. Mr. Harding is very much a neopolitical colonizer, offering surface deliverance with no sustaining or sustainable substance behind or beneath him. He therefore drains our vibes and our culture from us. And then, of course, there's the book title, Hard Ears, You Would Hear, Only Even Feel. So that's my 2 cents to get started this evening.
Thank you, Kay. There's a lot coming, Kay. I, for one, know people are going to want to know more about those cultural markers, how the mythology is and your discussion about the indigenous systems. I got my copy last year. You know, every year is last year now. Um, so I want I want to make sure that everyone realizes that this book was very recently written, and yet it wends history and things that all little folk tales with a whole present day mixing into it. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Robert, how are you this evening?
Not doing too badly. How about you?
I'm doing well too, thank you. Very excited to be here with you this evening.
Okay. It's been a little
Now,
while. Good to see you.
good to see you too. I love Nifka winning words. Is it's one of those things that will always be dear to my heart. So whenever I see winning
Hmm.
words be published, I'm very excited about it. And you yourself, um, with the three of you were the Governor General's awardee. I remember that quite well. Um, and we're going to talk about And Sometimes They Fly, which was also the recipient of the BMA Brands of Barbados Award. So that was absolutely fantastic that we're going to be talking about that. But before we get to that, you're going to be telling us all about the NIFCA Winning Words Anthology for 2019 2020. Um, I'm looking forward to find out who's in it and what I can expect to be reading from it. The prose, the poetry. Whisk us away, Robert.
Okay, I'll do what I can. Thank you very much, DeCarlo. And good evening, everyone. I'm going to just set the scene a little bit by using some of the blurb from the back to that. And it starts this way. These are normal times, and they are changing fast, and I think we can all agree with that. The Arts Etc. NIFCA Winning Words Anthology 2019-2020 reflects a grand interruption of normalcy by responding to and documenting our uncertain times. The reality that is the COVID-19 pandemic meant that no National Independence Festival of Creative Arts, no NIFCA, and specifically no NIFCA Literary Arts Competition took place in 2020. Now, the words between these covers emerged from the Goddard's NIFCA Literary Arts Competition year 2019, but also from a turbulence of poems, stories, essays, and other forms of commentary on social media and elsewhere that homed their way to the editor's attention the first year of lockdown and during a summer of hashtag Black Lives Matter. So there was a curating that went on then to put together the 2020 section, and 2019 was just waiting there for us. Now, this anthology is the fifth in the series edited and sponsored by Arts Etc. And the writing is both winning and award-winning. Challenging, insightful, clever, raw, all the terms you would expect, but it's true. It's very, very true. And there is writing for every kind of reader, including those keen to discover through Barbadian storytelling how a people felt and behaved in a time of upheaval. Now that is that's some of what's on the back cover. The selection is diverse. I think we've had, in this particular anthology, we've had the most contributors that we've ever had, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a selection from the anthology on Arts Etc's website as well. So it ranges from Raquel Williams, Gayle Weathers, Winston Farrell, Albert Branford, Anderson Devonish, Alex Downs, Annalie Davis, Ian Bourne, and Cindy Celeste Marshall. I say and, but it goes on, ... But that's just a selection of what is available. Now, the 2020 pieces are very up to the moment. We hear from writers, some of whom we don't often see in such anthologies, on the state of their Barbados, of our Barbados today, up to the very minute. Now, they discuss what it means to have national pride and also racial pride in this place. They discuss their hopes and fears in a very open and naked kind of way for our people. They consider what makes us strong as a people in our behavior, attitude, and symbols, and also what persists in weakening us in our behavior, attitude, and symbols. The Nelson statue is a classic example. They're serious, yeah, but witty and eloquent and humorous and indignant and laugh out loud funny, and funny peculiar as well. Now, this is, make no mistake, Bajan literature. Our literature, from social media to conventional media to other sources, responding to and expressing the way we are and live and hope to be today for that brighter future we often talk about, for ourselves, but also for our children and our children's children and so on. Now, but that can only come through an understanding of who we are and through such cultural and artistic expression that we also need to understand is something that we can value, that we can put out there. And even though the 2020 section might appear to be the star, there is no after without a before. We know how far we've come based on where we've started from. And there is a relative, I must emphasize the word relative, there's a relative calm in the selections for 2019. That's just to say that there's something bubbling beneath the surface, an impatience and a reckoning with the way we are today that then makes the upheaval, or well, potential upheaval to come of 2020 inevitable and also necessary. Some would say we're still waiting for it in a sense. One of my favorite short stories in 2019 is the opening story by Raquel Williams. As an anthologist, it's hard to say that's one of your favorite stories because all the stories that you have tend to be your favorite stories or your favorite piece. But in this particular one, a Bajan love story, we do indeed get a Bajan love story, but more than that, we get a Bajan response to love, to relationships, to sex that is honest, comic, dignified, messy, but very much proudly and maybe even a little sadly us. There's no denying it when you read the story, when you go through it. And there's room, though, in it, which is what I like about it. There's room to do better, as expressed in the husband and his response, the husband who suffers the horn, and even in the man who is the horn. So when you talk about the Winning Words anthology, especially this one, when you talk about a Winning anthology, we have always been about, or it has always been about, cultural preservation, preserving our heritage, preserving our storytelling, preserving our ways of seeing ourselves. Culture is, in many ways, the 5 W's and an H of what we do. Why do we dance? Why do we sing? Why do we perform? Why do we write, draw, believe, think, feel as we do? We touched on the death of Lammon, and there's a question there as to what that really means for us now, but also moving forward. And for me, the problem is not one of recognition or of acknowledgement. It's it's not one of existence or even evidence. Our culture is everywhere. Our culture is within us. We walk around with it. To say that we don't know our culture is kind of like saying we wouldn't know our own name. But do we see it? Do we value it? Do we hug it up and get close to it and share it? Those are, I think, some of the questions that we might perhaps discuss this evening. And that's all I got for you right now, DeCarlo.
Thank you, Robert. It'll take us through the evening for sure. That last question. I can't wait to discuss that around the table. Hi, good evening, Zoanne.
Hi, DeCarlo.
How are you this evening?
I'm good, thanks.
Now, this evening, you've selected the best of Carl Seeley. I'm not familiar with this one, so I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on it. I do know you very much someone who loves stories and being a story writer yourself. So, tell us about the best of Carl Seeley and which one is the best
Okay,
of the
first,
best. That's what we're all waiting to find out.
they're all quite good actually, and this is only 16 of them because he had contributed as many as 20 pieces to BIM magazine between 1945 and 1965. He was a very prolific writer. He was born on November 30th, 1922 in Carrington Village, so he would have known George Lamming. And I selected him because I wanted to create a sense of where we have come from and what got us started as writers in Barbados. And some of us would know him. We would have seen his work in Byton and literature books at school when we were students. Certain generations of us, and then others would know him because he would be in their age group. That's the older generation. But he was a very prolific writer, and he was from the Black working class and did not emigrate as many writers like Lammon and Austin Clarke would have, and then out of Trinidad, Samuel Selvin and so on. But he stayed in Barbados, and he made invaluable contributions to the literary landscape as we know it. And he actually laid the foundation for what we know today as, he helped lay the foundation for what we know today as West Indian / Barbadian writing. At a time when literature coming out of the West Indies, pre-independent Barbados, was British and was seen as the only type of writing worth reading. But Seeley and those of his era wrote on themes and depicted imagery to which locals could relate. And all the literature which we now enjoy in modern times had a basis from back in the 1940s, 30s. I'm talking about Barbadian literature. The literature that we enjoy as West Indian, as Barbadian now, had a basis from back then where the foundation was laid. And in this collection, he deals with themes such as migration, race and class, love and death. And there's often a historical component because he weaves in issues that actually took place. For example, when we look at migration and we look at My Father's Before Me, which features the character Dick, we see a young man who is chomping at the bit to migrate to England. And this story is written in 1958. And there would have been waves of migration after slavery. And Dick in this story is a yard man, and his father before him was a yard man, and his grandfather before him shoed horses. And he is tired of the cyclical nature of life on the plantation, which is a dead end and leads to nowhere for a young Black man. And he wants to migrate to England, much to the dismay of the women folk of his brood, because they saw what happened to his father, who died on the Panama Canal. They saw what happened to his grandfather, who lost his leg in the Boer War. But Dick nonetheless defends his menfolk and declares that, they just wanted something better. They wanted to get out of that rut. And we see also migration in Dream of Gold, which is a story of the Panama Canal and building on the Panama Canal, where we have the character Carles longing to go to Panama, which he in fact does. And he is lured in by the propaganda, which speaks of Panama as having streets of gold and trees with gold fruit on them. And he goes off to Panama and he loses his life. So Seeley manages, as I said, to weave themes that are and concepts to which people at the time could relate, which was something very new. Barbadians were not accustomed to reading about themselves. And in terms of race and class, we have the Pieces of Silver, which is a very popular piece. It appears even in school books in England to this day, and it appears in school books here as well. It was written in 1965. It there is mention of the currency at the time, which would have been shillings and pence, and young people reading would have an understanding on reading that we didn't always have dollars and cents in Barbados. We were a colonial entity. And in this story, Seeley takes us into what the education system was like. There was corporal punishment. In fact, it was pretty brutal. Children were lashed for having dirty nails. They were lashed for having dirty teeth. They were lashed for having unkempt hair. And there was inspection. So children were inspected after lunch and before going into the classroom. And the headmaster in this piece, the acting headmaster, is described as being a very brutal, unkind man who singles out the poor children, and many of whom, of course, would not have been able to bring to school money. And he's collecting money for the headmaster who's leaving. And he singles out those children who cannot donate anything and makes an example of them before the entire class. And this is not something that was uncommon. We have stories, we hear stories from our elders of what it was like going to school in colonial times. And it was quite uncomfortable for many of them. And then in the Tacit Truce, which is written in 1949, after the trade unions were formed in Barbados, we see an altercation between a maid by the name of Ethel Bourne and the man she takes care of, a white man called Mr. Stokes, whose daughter has hired Ethel to look after him, but who is very racist. And what Seeley brings out in this story is the waning tolerance of the Black working class for the indignities and the inequities which existed at the time. And when Mr. Stokes insults her and insults Black people by calling them lazy and a downright indolent bunch, and throws the tea service at her. He throws all the teacups and stuff at her. Her response is to retaliate, and she throws them back at him. And she tells him, when he says that he will have her fired, that she has a home to go to and a family that loves her. So Seeley is very aware of the ethos of the period, and in his stories, he manages to weave in what is going on in the different periods he writes about. In the White Baby, which is another one with race and class, we see the maid Jabba and Jabe, her white employee's son. And Jabba is presented as the stereotypical Black female with beautiful dark skin and a big bottom and big breasts, and Jabe as the licentious he represents the planter class, unfortunately, with his I say unfortunately because it's a negative representation if ever there was one, because here he is lusting after this woman who is his senior from what we gather, and she staves off his advances. But what is interesting about this story is the use of dialect, which would not have been common for when this story was written in 1950, where Jabba speaks dialect and Jabe, of course, speaks standard English. And what Seeley does is very interesting. He does not put one as better than the other, but both have equal footing, which gives a place to dialect that had never been given in the Barbadian construct. We would have had the Lizzie and Joe stories from 1903, but they were a caricature of Black characters, and Black characters were not necessarily presented in a very realistic light. But Seeley manages to present the Black working class with dignity, realistically, and he makes no apologies for showing what it was like to live in these times, these colonial times. And I think it is an interesting read. Like I said, it's available on Amazon and at the website carlseeley.com. His son had brought out this book to coincide with Barbados' 50th independence, and fortuitously, Seeley himself was born on November 30th. So I think it would be a good book to read for those of you who want to see what writing was like in the earlier times and what grounded the writing that we have now. Um, so that's my 2 cents worth. I could say a whole lot more about Seeley and his writing, but that's it from my neck of the woods for now.
Thank you, Zoan. That's well. I'm looking forward. It's on my list definitely for summer reading.
Okay.
I think we're going through a timeline. Now, I know I understand what the producers were talking about in terms of the order of today's sessions. Ooh, so I'm very excited now to introduce Joshua Clark. Good evening, Joshua.
Good evening.
Joshua is going to take us through And Sometimes They Fly by Robert Sandiford. Robert has a little smirk on his face, so let's see. Let's hear you, Joshua.
Well, as Robert would know, and I guess I would tell you all now, Robert was my tutor at the Barbados Community College, and presented to me a challenge when I was producing my own body of work for graduation. And sometimes they fly is, I feel, especially reflective of that challenge and of the work that sprang forth from that challenge through me and through other artists of my cohort. Matthew Clark being one of those, Tristan Roach being another. So let me just get into the summary and then the review. When the events of 9/11 trigger a calamity, a tumultuous occasion that signals that heroes must once again rise to bring balance and safety to humanity. Shepherded by an ancient in the form of an acerbic literature professor, I think Robert will, identify with that. Our three heroes, children of Barbados, the Caribbean, and the diaspora, must use their strength, flight, and speed to battle with fantastical forces out of history and legend that rise to claim our world. While they are pulled between their personal ties and their responsibilities as heroes for all of humanity. I mean, I had a lot of fun writing that summary, but And Sometimes They Fly to me is it's a depiction of Barbados that speaks particularly to a generation that was raised on a certain brand of pop culture. Those of us that would have grown up familiar with comic books, familiar with science fiction and fantasy, and would have desired stories like that featured people that looked like ourselves. But also, as a creative, it spoke to me in terms of an instruction, almost a demand that we also produce those things. Where Robert, of course, would have been making those similar demands to his students, asking those similar questions of his students. It's a My only complaint about the novel is that it is not long enough for my liking. I would have, read books upon books, following these characters, following Milton and Mackie, following these ancient beings who were shepherding modern contemporary Barbadians, who had to question themselves and question their place and their responsibility as children of the rock, but also children of the world. The book itself is intimately Barbadian, but still so familiar through the lens of genre, through the lens of familiar tropes of superheroics. But I really feel like the depiction of the powers specifically speaks to the unlimited capacity within ourselves, because as Robert outlines in the book through the characters, he mentions that they have enough power to approach any situation, but they may not know that they have that capacity until they are faced with that challenge. So, fast enough to outrun racist pursuers, but eventually fast enough to cross oceans. Flight that would take them above a pasture, but eventually, breaking the atmosphere and heading to space. This to me is the sign or to me spoke so heavily to me as a student at the time, where I would have just graduated and I would have purchased the book and read the blurb in the back. Um, but it also, I feel, is one thing that I often mention to my friends is that there is a certain lack of audacity when it comes to modern young creators in the Barbadian space, and an audacity that needs to be nurtured and unlocked, where we fully accept our capability to create anything on par with the greatest spectacles that we see. The story is particularly prophetic. I reread it just recently to prepare for this panel. It registers several things. I mean, it mentions Lord Nelson, whose statue has recently come down. It weaves in, of course, all our familiar myths and legends, but with a modern take that reminds the reader that these things are not dead and gone, but they are alive and constant and must be reckoned with, must be understood, must be celebrated in some cases. Um, and sometimes they fly is an invitation to the reader to add more, to see more, to create more, to do more. And to me, it is a demand from Robert to his students, to the reader, that he has opened this door into genre fiction. He has opened this door into the fantastical where our authors do not always tread. And he says, I have opened the door. Please walk through it. I am holding space. And yeah, I think I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. I always love like how teachers could influence their students with just their words. So that's a
He is remarkable.
fantastic story. He is. He really is. We have a fantastic panel tonight. They've chosen such fantastic books. We have the graphic novel. We have the fiction graphic novel. We have a look back at that the cusp and the start and the growth of Barbadian literature, with a piece with Carl Seeley. And then we've captured budding writers, established writers, writers capturing Barbadia as it exists in the world today. We talk about the colonial time, we talk about the post colonial times, but it's always very important that we necessarily have captured them creatively for persons to read and understand the times. And I think each writer's selections this evening speak to that. Hey, I'm really want to get into what Nigel and Matthew put forth in terms of, it's like old time scenes but used in a modern context. It's the same thing that we're noting that also in Robert's text. And then we're also realizing that Carl's work is somewhat ageless. Um because even though he's writing from a different time, he has captured history, and I'll say it from a student perspective, not quite as in a text, but the people who came kind of thing. You actually get to understand and see people living. And we've heard the stories, but someone has to capture them. And I always talk about the libretto is very important as we capture our history and our heritage, and how now it has informed, I'll call them the 21st century writers, that sit around this table, and we'll be able to capture them also in all of these texts, especially the NIFCA anthology. Now, 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention with its theme, The Next 50. World heritage is a source of resilience, humanity, and innovation. And I milled that around. I have to give you the heavy stuff that they gave me. As I milled that around in my head and listened to the discussion, as each person gave their review, it's like, okay, I see the themes of resilience, the themes of humanity and innovation. Carl, as he captured parts of what happened, with the Panama diaspora, with the migration to Panama. Humanity comes up in the discussion. What happens on Juve Island, in terms of resilience and the innovation that we're noting in these writers. These writers are not only talking about things that happen here, they're not only talking about things that happen directly to them, they're talking about things that are happening within the environment, the society, and the world. And my first question, just to get the table started, Kay puts on her glasses. Oh, this is going to be good. Is does this speak? Do your work speak to the longevity and the resilience of one, the Barbadian literary landscape, and the whole direction and the development of perhaps the literary marketplace, one from the writer's perspective, and of course, yeah, I see the cogs. How important is it? We have these different landscapes. Literary is very important. Okay.
I would say that we are seeing increasingly an awareness from authors especially of the need to connect and be relevant to the modern day literary reader, which is where I think the genesis of Hard Ears would have come from. Yes, we need to acknowledge our culture, but we also need to acknowledge the modernity in which our population exists. And I think that right now the literary landscape is really a kind of a marriage between those two. And these newer, more successful works are sort of a nod to that. So when we look at Harders and other works like Sherry Jones, Kieran Lord, they very much want to nod to our history, our heritage, our culture, but they also very much want to connect to what they know our people are reading and experiencing as being, ever more part of a shrinking world. I hate to use cliches, but that globalization of which we are to which we are all subject. So, that need to maintain our artistic integrity or who we are, while still being a part of this larger whole.
So we bringing back stick licking, K.
Yes, we are. If you go on YouTube, there are videos, there are tutorials. Lots of clubs are being established. We actually did a performance as a part of our Torchlight series a few years ago, just before the pandemic. Everything is just before the pandemic, where we featured Stick Licking by John Cavadon Bucket Stick, and you would not believe how well attended it is because people are thirsty for those parts of our culture which are interesting and exciting, but about which very little is known. But right now you can go on YouTube, you can learn how to make a stick, what wood to choose. You can get tutorials, you can hook up with different groups. There are different people out there, and of course we still have our key heritage bearers out there who are more than willing to teach the craft. And better yet, our young people are interested. So yeah, we are bringing back the stick.
Thank you. So it's quite interesting. I know Nigel's like I won't date myself, but he's around my age. I think I look youthful enough in the panel today. How has he captured that? You know, when we hear about stick licking, we're all children of history. When we hear about stick licking, how does it fit into the current learning landscape?
I think um, it is not now what it was then. Then it was a part of culture, it's a part of village life. It was, for example, a way to settle arguments. It was so you could challenge, there were clubs, there were so it was really much more widespread now, similar to things like playing worry. Once upon a time, there was worry just about everywhere. Now there are worry in special enclaves where people set out deliberately to learn it because they think it is a beautiful thing to preserve and safeguard, but it's not as ingrained in us as it used to be. That said, for my one part, my experiences with our youth programs coming out of the museum, what I have observed is that when you reach out and you teach these things, there is always this sense of wonder because they've they know these sometimes, not all the time, but they don't understand the story, the life, the culture behind it. But once they grasp these things, there is this almost gleeful passion as they want to learn everything there is to learn about it. So we've done things like making traditional toys, and we've had like 15, 16-year-olds, 20-year-olds up and down on rollers that they've made themselves because they didn't understand what it was to be a part of this. I've actually deliberately started teaching traditional games when I go out to the schools and so on, because what I've discovered is not that they're not interested, is that somewhere along the lines we have not passed it on from one generation to the next. And when you think about it, we are very much about oral traditions. In our past history, but as we've gone to school all these many years now, everything is writing, reading, internet, computer. And I think maybe that is what has caused our disconnect with the things that we've started passing on. So what I coming back to the book now, what is really, really lovely is to see the way how they've woven these passed down traditions into their storyline. So you see it through the power of the landship. You understand that there's the drum, and they put the lure of the various elements of the tuck, and they weave it into the way how the tuck band fights, and they explain that stick licking is a way of life, not just a performative art. And these things, I think as we go and we read it, and I think they are doing a wonderful job of sort of centering how we should understand our culture, not as something that was interesting because we saw it on stage, but as something that we can practice and enjoy, and it can still be a part of who we are, just like putting a sauce on a Friday, Saturday, whenever.
So, Joanne, jumping right to you because, you know, it's like Matthew and Nigel start here and kind of like bring forward some things that may have happened, for instance, in Carl's time. Is anything similar that you think within his text, call it text, because it's really creative, that perhaps will speak, after we look at Matthew, look at Nigel, that we can go back to Carl and appreciate and understand it. Perhaps looking at it from like we see as established, but he lived it, part of the genesis.
I didn't get that last part. We see it as
It,
established, but
but he was part of maybe part of the, like what he captured.
um, well, what he captured was a lot of what took place in history, and I would say uh, in Dream of Gold, for example, the whole um, pilgrimage to, if you could call it that, to Panama. He captured the whole eagerness to go and the fervor, because when you read the story you see that Carles is just obsessed with this going to Panama. And in My Father's Before Me as well, the character Bessie speaks of her husband's obsession of going to Panama, and this whole thing about bringing back gold. Of course, we know that when the black workers went, they were paid in silver and not in gold. So what he manages to capture is moments in time, lest we forget. And he puts it in a way that you would want to read. It's not delivered in a form that is not
It's not
inviting, is not.
pedagogical. It's like, yeah.
Yes, it's very easy to digest, to understand, and even to relate to, because I mean the whole concept of going somewhere better where you can make money. Barbadians are constantly migrating. Migration has not stopped, and people migrate to better themselves. And he captures that very well with Carlos in Dream of Gold, and with My Father's Before Dick in My Father's Before Me. Um, so there's that preserving of that past, and also in the pieces of silver when he captures what school was like. I mean, I would have heard my father talk about the inspection time, and my uncle talk about inspection time and how your fingernails and so on were checked, and even sometimes like how the teachers treated you. I myself as a teacher, so I'm not knocking teachers, but it was not a place that I would have liked, a time that I would have liked to live in. So what Carl Seeley does is he preserves the posterity, um, things from the past that it may not be something like stick licking, for example, but it is snippets of our history, lest we forget from whence we came. And I think it makes the reader all that more appreciative of what we went through as a people. I will say that Carl Seeley was one of the people that I did in my doctoral thesis, and I did three other writers, and it took me back to, I had to do, because it was an archival study, I did a lot of historical research, and I learned so much about Barbados. I mean, things that you wouldn't believe, things that would make you sigh, things that would make you sad, things that would make you angry about our past. And what it made me, it gave me a greater appreciation for education. It gave me a greater appreciation. Well, I always respected our elders, but it certainly gave me a greater appreciation for what they went through to bring us to the point. There's so many things that we take for granted, like free education, our healthcare system, our ability to vote. I mean, when Carl Seeley was born, there was adult suffrage and male adult suffrage and so on. These things are not things that were privy to everybody. You had to have a certain amount of land to be able to vote. And you had to pay for school, and so it was a very different time. But yet still they made it, and we complain so much today, and we have so much more that they didn't have.
Thank you. I mean, I love the whole discussion so far. We're looking at like defining cultural heritage. Like even looking at your past, and it's brought back to the future, and understanding where we started, and where we are, and even um what shapes what we do now. As you were saying, Zoan, that the different landscape in terms of paying for education then, and that's why it's so important now. And I just love the whole discussion. I always look at the different diasporas, Panama, Windrush, the 70s, um, and it just begs the question of how we've looked before and what we're seeing now. And it takes me to that discussion. I'm gonna rope you in right now, Robert, because I'm so interested in terms of how the writers that you started to discuss that are in the Winning Words anthology, how we've just gone through, we're still going through it, I'm sorry, the world pandemic. We had the Black Lives Matter movement, and I mean, even things that Zoan has spoken about so far, so things that affected Barbados, as you looked at Barbados. And it's not that other things outside there didn't affect us, but we weren't so much looking out and being the strength of the outer world as perhaps we would have seen in the Black Lives Matter movement, this whole idea of Nelson, and 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 things that are part of our heritage, but they're not so good a part of our heritage, so to speak. um how do you see all these different authors, and even yourself as an editor in this role? um it's like a switch has flipped in terms of defining cultural heritage in writing.
I that's a good question. It's a big question. um, because remember, was before what I was saying, that I think the evidence is there. I think the work is there. The material is there. The question is, are we? What is our relation? What is our relationship that in relation to that work? That to me tends to be maybe the bigger question or the bigger discussion sometimes. I All of the books that we're discussing, from The Winning Words to my own, certainly Hard Ears, and Carl Seeley's, that little collection that Zoanna's chosen, all of them, beg certain questions, and the questions are all interconnected. One for me is, what do we lose? Zoanna was talking before about Carl Seeley and what he produced, and he wasn't alone. What do we lose when our significant, and in quotation marks, minor writers are not taught as part of our wider literary canon? I think that is a problem. That's something that we need to maybe consider and discuss a little bit more. We don't often think about that. Sometimes we stop at, Lamming or Kamau, or pick another name that might be, Timothy Callender. We stop kind of there, and then we don't consider who else is producing or what else they may be producing. And there is a market. You had asked before, DeCarlo, about considering the market itself, and yeah, you start doing it for yourself initially, the work, the writing, the process. But at some point, you want to share this, and you want to know that there's a market out there, or you want to know there's somebody out there who will also pick this up and buy it and be interested in it and want more. So there has to be this balance, of course. But I also think that when we're minding our own work, we have to be very clear on what is important to us, and then also help other people to understand what is important too. There's another question attached to this as well. When it comes to the work, are we still ignoring speculative fiction and the full range of our own imagination in favor of social realism? That's something that we can also consider. And could we be doing more with the graphic novel form? These are just certain questions that would have come to me as we've been discussing this tonight, but also in reading the books and preparing for the work. Carl Seeley's work is incredibly vivid. And Hard Ears, opening it up again, preparing for this panel discussion, it just blew me away. I am heartened to hear that Joshua took up the challenge, a number of the challenges that I would have been issuing to him, Matthew, and other students. He mentioned them, Tristan. But there's more work to be done, of course. So that's my question. What's the more work? Are we ready for it?
Thanks, Robert. I'm always interested. And what's the writing voice now, or what's the reading voice now? Admittedly, we do know that we are all now children of globalization, and sometimes the simple short story that used to be quite enamoring is not taken in the same light, especially with the younger readers. Kay started even her discussion, and as much as we were talking about writing, we found ourselves, she told us, okay, write a book and make sure you have some digital media attached to it to keep the conversation going, because that's what engages younger persons now. um it's very interesting, and I'll throw this to Joshua now and bring you in, Joshua. um and it's very interesting. I do see you as a graphic artist. I do know you as an illustrator, so to speak. And here you took up the challenge of taking up Robert's book. So my question to you, I mean, he's it's not as graphic as Matthews and Nigel's. But in the same token, it takes that form but with more written word. How did you really, how would you promote it? You know, yeah, how do you promote it? How are we as writers in the 21st century molding our work to be read by younger people, to be interested by younger people? No, Robert was really wanting to know about this. And then we're going to jump into a whole question about misappropriation and the flip switch on that. But Joshua, as a concept artist, illustrator, talk us through what you found very engaging and how that makes it world ready.
Well, I think I could speak to this both from the point of view of reading Robert's work in terms of being an artist who is searching for what many artists in the industry would call a visual library. A visual library is a collection of ideas and concepts that you would draw upon when you're creating your own original pieces. And what Robert has gifted to artists is a visual library that is uniquely Barbadian, that presents the fantastical through a uniquely Barbadian lens. Now, if one was to look at Hard Airs, which is brilliant and fantastic, one would not want to replicate Hard Airs. You would want to be inspired by it, but you would not want to replicate it. But if you look at Robert Sanford's book, then the visual you create from reading his book is uniquely your own. And that is the way in which genre fiction specifically can appeal directly to people working in industries that work in parallel alongside writers, alongside, the people who are keepers of our history. Because it is the real world, it is the accounts of our history that will speak directly to the creators that will shepherd our culture going forward. Now, specifically speaking to the question of publishing, self publishing has exploded. There are many small press fiction authors who they write their works, they self edit in some cases. If they can afford an editor, they go with that. And then the work hits YouTube for promotion and Amazon for distribution directly. And that's the way that they've found small but sustainable audiences. And I feel like this is the way that we should teach going forward, because I think that we have stratified our presentation to our young creators in terms of these are the textbooks that you're reading, these are the novels that you'd buy in the shop, these are the comic books you'll pick up in the store, and these are all separate things. But in truth and in fact, with the globalization of media and with the, consolidation of many outlet houses, it means that, if it's on Amazon, it's on Amazon. It will go directly to someone's phone. They can order a physical copy. They can order a digital copy. And while it does mean that the breadth of options out there is wider, it does mean that people who are looking for specific things can find them much easier. So if you're looking for genre fiction set in the Caribbean, set in Barbados specifically, then you can find that with a keyword search. And I mean, in terms of claiming that space, in terms of holding that space culturally, as you can see from my background, this is the work that I produce. This is the work that I create. When I create works for myself or even for a client, when I am gifted with the freedom to create works, the places I pull from are Caribbean. They are African. They are based on our heritage. Even within the fantastical worlds that I am operating in, it means that I bring that sense of identity, I bring that sense of culture, I bring that sense of heritage to the work that I create, and I try my best in all spaces and in all places to make sure that if there is room, then I express myself in that way, and if there isn't room, I'll slip it in regardless. So yes.
Thank you, Joshua. I'll bring it back to you. Do you see the need for us perhaps as writers to move more to being picturesque, more graphic, especially where now we're bringing our children back into school and hard and fast, and everyone is becoming very online. How do you think we will survive as writers?
I think that I am a very visual person, but I am first of all a lover of stories, and I feel that the stories we tell to ourselves and about ourselves, are how we create our identity and how we preserve our identity. So my question isn't that I think that yes, there can be expansion into the visual medium, but I also think that being able to tell a story, whether you are writing down that story or whether you are delivering it on one of the various social medias, through whatever form, whatever construct that manifests as. I've listened to fascinating stories on TikTok. I've read them on aggregator websites like Reddit. So the room for the written word, the room for a well-told story will always be there. And I think that it's not maybe a question so much of changing how we present our stories as much as making sure we take advantage of every avenue we have to tell those stories. I mean, I would put Lord Zen and his short comedy works up against anybody I've ever seen in the comedy space. And he is a creator that is telling, I mean, jokes are stories, very short stories, but stories nonetheless. And he is a person that is telling uniquely Barbadian stories to an international audience. So I feel that it's less a question of understanding. It's less a question of changing our tack than it is of understanding that the means to get those stories to the people are out there, and we need to take advantage of them more.
Thank you. Zoan, how do we get um, Carl Seeley's stories to live another 50 years?
Well, it's interesting you talk about illustration and so on. I think one way is to get them into these schools. And I too am a very visual person, and um, I like books that are illustrated. It may sound childish, but I love to see well illustrated works. And I think of when I had to do Dr. Faustus as an undergrad student, and I couldn't find the textbook, and there was a comic book version in the bookstore at UE, and I bought it. I think I either got an A or a B plus on that particular course. And I think one way to, well, the work is being digitized for sure. One of the things I had worked on was to see that it could be digitized, and the DLOC library in the United States has digitized some of Seeley's work, and they're hoping to digitize all of these works that would have been in BIM, so that there's access to our young people who are very digital and very technologically savvy. So one way I think is to get it out there, which they are doing digitally. I think another way would be to reintroduce it into the schools. Our textbooks need revamping, as far as I'm concerned, and we need to introduce our newer authors. We need to introduce our older authors. I find that islands like Jamaica and Trinidad really make their writers known. Their people know their writers. It's like that part of the Bible where talks about your walls are ever before me. I think we have to keep our writers ever before us. We have to be proud of us. Were we proud of Rihanna before she went to the States and was discovered? We should be proud of our people right here. And that is something writers like uh, Austin Clark and Lammon spoke about. A prophet is without honor in his own country. And I think, to answer your question, we need to get the work out there in the schools, and we need to have more programs like these. I like what CBC does in terms of bringing us all of these programs on our community and our heritage and so on. We need more of that. That's how we will know about our writers, and we will learn to appreciate them. And we probably need to package it in a way too that children will like. And children like stories. Children like well told stories. Children like illustrations. I love to draw myself, and I love a good illustration. So any way that is marketable, any make use of technology, make use of art, make use of the ability to tell a story in a different way. Doesn't have to be read. When I say seriously, it doesn't have to sound so erudite that it's going to make children fall asleep. But I think we have to reach our children. We have to reach our young people. And our elders would appreciate it too. I don't think we should write off. There are a lot of retired people who love to hear what's going on and know what's going on, and we shouldn't be leaving anybody out. Just cater to, as Joshua said, cater to all the different facets. Find the creative ways to do so, and don't let anything hold us back.
Thank you. I think that is superb in terms of how the direction that we can take in the next 50 years, because I think we're being very responsive to how the world is going and how society is going. And we do know that in the last 50 years the idea of modernity has sped up exponentially, and we being in Barbados being in the middle of it, our geopolitical region, and as our support origin, we have lots of things that influence how we do things and how we present them. Um, I did speak to Robert and like how we capture things in especially in the NIFCA literary words, and we do know that NIFCA's base is to make sure that we continue the heritage and our cultural development in all different art forms. And I just wonder, Robert, bring you back into the discussion. I'll put it this way: who does it best? Are we telling our best stories, or are persons out there who are not necessarily part of our heritage and our backgrounds telling our stories better? And if that's the case, what do we need to do to let people know that what we are saying is what is true, what we are and how we are saying it is what is best, and how we are definitely the leaders in terms of the discussion of what is Caribbean and what is the Barbadian experience.
Okay. Since you started with winning words, I'll kind of hide behind that a little bit. um, because I think winning words is full evidence that we do it best, that we've been doing it for quite some time, telling our own stories. There is a problem, as Zoanne says, with the way perhaps we put it out. I don't know. I don't necessarily know why that is. Um, we've had writers who have been very, very successful. Sometimes we know about these writers, sometimes we don't. Um, we've had artists, not just we're talking heritage. We can bring in everything. We have art. We have artists who are out there through various channels, various platforms, as Joshua was mentioning. And Kay was also talking about how excited the young people get, how excited people get, period, when they can tap into their heritage a little bit more and connect and realize that they're participating in something that is part of them, that is about them, that comes out of them. Uh, so when you ask me, do other people tell our stories better? I don't think so. No, I'm not even going to hedge. No, they don't. we tell our stories better. Um, it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I don't know if Joshua remembers. There was a time in class we were talking about Neil Gaiman's work and talking about his use of Anansi and other folklore characters and mythological characters. And I remember, if I remember correctly, I remember Joshua saying to me, Robert, or he called him Mr. Sandiford, whichever one. He said, are you put out? Are you upset that he got there first? And I can't remember exactly what I answered at the time, but I do know that thinking about the question later on, I was sort of like, well, no, he didn't get there first. He's very much a Johnny come lately. We were there first. This is ours. These are the stories we've been telling all along. But there is a perception, perhaps, because of how he spun it and how he's gotten it out there and his skills as a writer, which are tremendous. There's this perception, perhaps, that what he's doing or he's done it best. No, no. But we do have to shift, I think, how we put ourselves out there and what we put out there for others to see. The material, the work is strong. There's full evidence of that. Uh, but again, are we promoting each other? Zoana's right. Shows like this, opportunities like this are fantastic because then we can talk about the work that's there. And winning words, that's ready to go to the schools. There's material there that can easily go in, and illustrators. Joshua, you ready? There are books there that need illustrating for sure. Stories that need illustrating. We just have to
Definitely.
continue to put it out and believe in it.
As
So
writers, as writers all and readers all, do you see us being? I mean, we're definitely moving more in the whole entire digital and online society. And Kay, you could even give further your perspective as someone at the museum. As we move more as a digital online society, um, is it still translating to the word? Is it still translating to literacy? Are persons understanding that that comes first and then the digital landscape? And do you think that we might be going towards a place where we're going to start digitally and then they're going to come back to the written word?
I think we have to do both together. And I say this on the basis of some experiences that I've had of late. So, for example, we needed to do a literacy challenge in May this year. And what I found interesting, even when I was preparing the content, is a very, very simple competition we did. We chose a quote written by a Barbadian author or from a book where the book was set in Barbados. And people basically just had to go online and guess the title of the work and the author. And, the usual thing, put a hashtag and blah, blah, blah. And what I found interesting was that the books that were known were the books which were available digitally, because that is how a lot of people are processing and acquiring their books. No disrespect to the books out there. I myself love to have a hard copy in my hand to read.
Hmm.
The people who are buying books nowadays are looking for digital copies of everything. Out of it too is an economic thing. Like take hard ears for example. Hard ears retails on average just under $100 in the hardcover edition, which is what I wrote for this event this evening. But if you go on Amazon.com right now, you can get the Kindle version of Hard Ears for $99 US, available instantly. That's the word Amazon
Hmm.
uses. So you see the difference there, as and especially our younger generations. They are people. They're not wait 2 weeks for it to ship to Barbados people. I mean, and when you think about the fact now that you then have to buy like the hardcover, the soft copy, if you bought them from Amazon, they're roughly about 20 US, a little bit under, but then you have to ship them to Barbados. And then of course the
Hmm.
bookstores have got to pay their overheads or whatever. So there's going to be a markup. And all of that is a cost that has translated to the buyer. Like I said, coming challenge. Um, the books which people knew better were the readily available online, and the books which they knew less well are the books which are out of print, or books which you have to maybe go get from the bookshop or the public library, or booksellers like Black Rock Books or whoever. Shout out to Andy Tate, who has been pushing Caribbean literature for as long as I have known myself. I think he's got children, not to shout out poor Andy's age, but basically, there are wonderful people out there. We all love books. We're all pushing the books. We all love the fact that there's Caribbean literature. As I moved into content which was not as readily, so the stuff that's out there, like Sherry Jones's book, I put the quote out there, and 15 minutes later, answers were there. I do a quote from Paul Marshall, and some people got the right author, the wrong book, guessing list. Some people uh,
Yes.
ascribe books from one author to another, and then so the newer authors who are perhaps not as well known, maybe they got the name
Hmm.
right. But basically, what people knew had a lot to do with how readily available the work was. So that's the number one thing. And publishing is very, very expensive in Barbados. Like one of the things the museum does is we assist with publishing the works of authors. And it costs a lot of money to get a proper layout done. It costs money to print. It costs money to and we've done different things. We've done producing it locally. We've done doing the soft copy stuff locally and having it printed overseas as far away as 8 countries and shipping it back. Different things we've tried to keep the cost down, but the long and short of it is that reading is becoming almost a pursuit of the people with the money to buy books. So want of a better way of putting it. I used to joke with my friends once upon a time that I work to buy books. And as sad as that is, that's a reality of literature nowadays. You as the author that wants to be published, you either have to have somebody who believes in you to help front that bill, to help say, we are going to help you produce this. Most of the time they don't do have the goodness of their heart. So it means that you then as the author have to give up a little bit of your intellectual property for somebody else to make a profit off your work, which rubs quite a few people the wrong way, even though they don't have the money necessarily to self-publish. But even for those who do, for those who've gotten the support, for those who've been lucky enough to maybe write in and get maybe creative industries grants or whatever to help them progress with that work, it's quite a bit of effort involved to become published. And then once you become published, sometimes it's so expensive. People are like, cha boy, that book look interesting, but whoo, it's $100. So we can't leave the digital behind, because if we don't have that digital outlet for people to earn the work at a more reasonable cost, and also with the immediacy of the digital age, a lot of that work is going to get left behind simply because they're not getting the exposure. But also, so we have to sort of work with that. But I'm not saying that we need to necessarily leave the storytelling behind. The storytelling is very much at the center of the work. Without the story, there is no book, there is no literary work.
Thank you, Kay. That was a mouthful. My whole question to the entire panel, though.
Sorry.
The entire panel is for you to all give the perspective of how agile are we as a society for literary works to publish, to create, and for us to have the consumer marketplace. Once upon a time, and it starts, we always have momentous things. Um, it's funny, we did talk about Lammon, we talk about Selvin, the Windrush writers, the diaspora writers, and even in Robert's take in his text, it speaks about modern day diaspora, funnily enough. Um, are we skilled to be agile enough to write for the modern society, to capture all these essences of resilience and what the humanity of Caribbean people, the humanity of Barbadians, um, and that speaks to the innovation. Um, our writers today and our readers today. We have the panels a mixed cadre, so you can each give your take on it. Yourselves as writers, yourselves as illustrators. Joshua, you illustrate, you tell a story, whatever you're drawing also. And then of course you are a reader. um how agile are we to respond to the demands of the marketplace and retain the essence of being a Barbadian writer, and to engage the world in seeing Barbados through our colored lens?
Well, I think that, to me, the question again comes back to audacity. It is that I have met, I know personally, many fantastic creators on the island. I do not always see their work put out there. Even there are many creators that sit at home and create fantastic things and then never show anyone. And I was one of those people. It was not until my friend Jericho, my friends Jericho and Art came to me and said, "Do you want to make something together?" that I came out of my cave metaphorically and started making work that would eventually be online and be in these spaces. So to me, it is about no telling our children, telling our young people, telling everyone, you are already worthy of a space on the stage. Come and claim your space. That I feel is one of our greatest barriers to telling our stories and having our stories heard. Not necessarily that we're not making fantastic things. I mean, as Robert would attest, there are writers working today that are producing fantastic work. It is that they're not always available, they're not always present, they're not always part of the public understanding of this is also Barbados, this is also us. So that to me is the crux of the matter. Reclaiming that audacity, the same audacity that the average person from a larger country or one that seems to more firmly have established themselves on the world stage to be like, yeah, we already good, we putting it out now, right? That I think is where we are lacking most, which I feel is a hurdle that we have to acknowledge, but we can definitely overcome.
Thanks, Joshua. Zoan,
I think that
same
we are
question.
getting I think that we are agile enough. I think our young people have the audacity and the boldness. When I think of Celeste, our spoken word poet, and I think of Ray Minister
Thank you,
and Rico
Celeste.
Suave and these people who do spoken word, and uh, I am confident and I am hopeful, and I think that we have the agility to get out there and market ourselves. I think it will take time, but we keep knocking down that door. And like I said, those young people programs like this, when the two marry, you're gonna get a starburst. And I think we're on the cusp of greatness when it comes to getting our writers out there. We have, as um, Kay mentioned so often this evening, Sherry Jones. Sherry went all the way to, was mentioned by Oprah's book club, and she went on Good Morning America. And unfortunately, her
Mm-hmm.
book, unfortunately, her book isn't that available here. As Kay said, the prices are prohibitive, but you can get the Kindle versions online. And I have been doing that a lot during lockdown, buying the Kindle versions. And since the uptake in tax, when we buy books online now, I am just investing in a lot of Kindle books. And I think we have what it takes, and our young people are going to lead the way. I'm pretty confident in that. They have the audacity, they have the gifts, the talent. We have great artists, we have great spoken word poets, we have great writers. We have, in the artistic world, we have great dancers. We're out there. It seems a little harder with the literary works, but we are shouting and we will be heard as far as I'm concerned. I'm very hopeful.
Thank you, Zoan. Robert, you work with a lot of writers. Yourself as a writer, what is the catalyst to take us through the next 50 years and engage young people um, in the
I would say one of the things would be to have works for young people, works that appeal to young people. That's certainly a place to start. Um, but I wouldn't put any restrictions or any barriers in the sense that it's not an uh, either this or that. It's an and. It has to be an and, I think, all the way through. So it will be digital works, and also a printed copy of something if you want it. It will be a graphic novel. But hey, look, there's a prose version. And if we look at it that way, then we really open things up. In Winning Words itself, uh, yeah, we have some straight up essays, but then we have pieces more like blogs. There's poetry, but there are also Instagram posts. We have some photography in there as well. When I look at this particular Winning Words anthology that was produced, this fifth one, and the one the fifth one that Arts Etc. produced, and the one that captures that moment, 2020, the pandemic and everything, and I compare this particular volume to other similar books out there that also have works that they're dealing with the pandemic, that they've anthologized and everything from whatever source, it stands up. Winning Word stands up. It may even stand up head and shoulders above it. That's just me saying that. But it stands up. It is just as good as, if not better. But we have to also stand up. We have to stop being maybe a bit too laid back when it comes to our works. And when it comes to what the other person is doing, let me know what you're doing. Share. Let the other person know what you're doing. That story that Joshua told about coming out of the cave, seen a bit too much of that, where you look at a person and you say, what are you doing? And so I'm just doing this here, but it's really great. Do you want to do more with it? Yeah, but what? You know, we have to stop being, I think, too laid back here. That might be one of the greatest differences when it comes to maybe how the Trinidadians are moving or other groups are moving, the Jamaicans. There's more of an aggression, perhaps, not in a bad way. That audacity, that is a good word to use.
Thank you for that. Definitely, Joshua. I think we spoke a lot about the audacity, and I think that would definitely respond to the idea of what will make us resilient and what necessarily would take us through the next 50 years is that we mustn't fear the digital landscape, but we must embrace it and see it as a complementary tool as we continue to develop the Caribbean voice, the Barbadian voice, especially in literature. I've been, and I think so many people have been motivated either one to capture their stories. You need to put it down and also determine how we're necessarily going to share it and to continue the idea of not only literature um, but literacy in the Caribbean context. And I think, uh, for the most part, for all of us, we have spoken to the whole idea of what next in terms of the literary landscape, and that will take us through to the next 50 years as we celebrate what, in essence, is our heritage. It never starts with heritage, it just starts as you. 5 years down the road, then it starts to get dated, and we start to look back and we realize how far we've come. And I think when you think back for when all the starts of Caribbean literature started, whether it was the Windrush Age and the BBC experience guides, it was the case of the start of NIFCA in 1974, and the continued work that it has done throughout these last 50, 45 years. Um, you see that idea of resilience does exist. That idea of innovation does exist. And we had four fantastic features this evening, not only in terms of the work that they selected, but they themselves are living readers and writers and directors within the craft. They've given us guidance and ideas to go forth. And definitely, as I did start this evening's discussion, or summer reads. And because of that, we know either one, as they've all said, we need to have more sessions like this. So I'm going to implore the Ministry of Culture. Um, Maybe we do something special in November, but we can't wait until June because hopefully after tonight's presentation, we have a plethora of new works coming out where we'll have persons put in more books of Barbadian essence, Barbadian stories, or even simply Barbadians putting words on a page and maintaining the idea that we too are part of the library of the world. I like to thank our panelists this evening. I just asked them if they have any final words. Okay.
I would just like to say that we are, shall we say, on the cusp, on the lip of something great. The audiences are there and they're begging for the content, not just in Barbados, but across the diaspora as well. I frequently have friends from overseas saying to me, what's the latest thing that has been published in Barbados? Where can we get a copy? And then I'm having to say, well, maybe it's on Amazon. Okay, I'll see if I can get you a local copy and post it to you. In the museum bookshop, we frequently have people contacting us asking for books by local authors because they're not able to get them. I think that basically once we can streamline how we produce things and how we get things to market, how we keep people informed of what is happening in the literary world in Barbados, we're going to really see our local literary market explode. People are interested. When we do a theatrical performance in the museum, people come in and if they haven't heard about it until after, then they're upset. The last Torchlight we did before the pandemic, we just did a thing where we were looking at Barbadian folk tales, and we had this thing where we basically every time we thought we were done, we had to hold it over again because that is how thirsty people were for the stories and the reenactments of our culture, our heritage, our ethos, how we are, who we are. So people are hungry, and we just need to connect our writers with our readers more effectively.
Thanks, QK. Zoan, any final words?
I would say start with our schools as well. I endorse what Kay says, and I would say also start with our schools. We have people like Linda Dean who go into the schools, and we have had writers like Norma Meek, who is probably not well known, who would have gone into schools, and invite more of the writers into the schools. Have days, open days where writers come in. Have days where where students create work. Have school magazines. Have students writing their work. Students are eager to write and to see themselves published. I mean, we have to train them. We have to hone them. It starts from young. Get that interest in reading so that by the time they get to university, you're not having students, when you ask how many of you like reading, you say, well, ma'am, English really ain't my thing. I just doing this course because it's a university course and I got to do it. Start in the schools. And because even if we can't start in the homes, because not all parents are able to what should I say, encourage their children. They should be able to encourage their children into reading, but some parents aren't themselves grounded in reading. So let the schools be the breeding ground, so to speak, where there is that richness and that heritage for our writing. Teach the children our local writers, teach them our local craft, and get them interested. Make it interesting. Invite the artists in, the writers. Make open days and make it fun. Children love fun. They learn when learning is fun. So for me, that would be the big thing. Start with the children. Start with the schools.
Robert.
Yeah. It's just about endorsing, continuing to endorse what's being said, what Kay said, what Zoana said. I'm sure that's what Joshua's going to go ahead and say too. Look, there's no writing without reading, but there's also no storytelling without storytelling. Tell your stories to your kids. A time where you do this that's happening around you. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not a reader, or I don't really know about books. They may not be what they used to be in days past, perhaps, but newspapers are still newspapers. They're just source of information, and our writers do try, for sure. So, you could do a version of the book, basically something to read. And if you're really hard up, you don't know what to look for, you something, Arts Etc. produces an annual reading list of Barbadian literature. 12 titles, a title a month, get you through the year to the next year. But again, if that's too much, start with the books that have been put forward just tonight. From what I've seen and from what I've read, a little bit self-serving because one of my titles is a part of it. But leaving that one out, Hard Airs, Carl Seeley's work, and and certainly the work that you'll find in Winning Words, well worth exploring, well worth dipping into, well worth checking out.
Thank you, Robert. And Joshua.
You're welcome.
Well, I mean, obviously everything that my esteemed panelmate has said, but also I'd like to just say that you are already well on your way. Make the thing and show it to people. Show it to as many people as possible. Show it often. Be proud of the fact that you have chosen to create something. I'm speaking directly to everyone with that feeling to tell a story, with that feeling to create, and find the spaces where you can engage in whatever form of artistic expression is your chosen one. If if you tell poems, Poetry Lime just opened back up a couple weekends ago, I think 2 weekends ago. Lucy Hammonds and Cindy are running a fantastic space for modern spoken word artists in Barbados. Roy Minister obviously has continued to carry that torch. There are directors, there are writers, there are people working in this space. And when they see you create your own thing, when you come to them, when you communicate with them, because they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on Twitter, they resonate with you. When you resonate with them, iron sharpens iron, and we are lifted by the presence of more of us. So continue to create. That's what I'll say.
Thank you, Joshua. Claim yourself. The libretto lives on. And it's that ageless art form. It is timeless and it lives on, even on yellowed pages, hidden away in your bookshelf as we speak. Kay, Zoanne, Robert, and Joshua, thank you for a fantastic evening. You've really got our juices flowing. I myself might not write that technical document after all. I might actually put my pen back onto some creative paper and identify myself and keep that heritage going. On behalf of the Ministry of Culture and, of course, the Heritage Month Committee, we'd like to thank you all for agreeing to be part of this panel. Jaslyn and your team, you're brilliant. CBC, thank you so much for your support. And I look forward to seeing you at other Heritage Month events. I think this weekend we're going to watch films in the Freedom Park. If you haven't been, this is the opportunity to go. Not only on the wall, but to actually enjoy the new green space in Bridgetown. Kay, Zoanne, and Robert, I'll meet you there. We're going to have a good time with popcorn and perhaps we can exchange some books. To all those who tuned in online this evening, thank you and do have a good night. We look forward to seeing you again next year for another Heritage Month. Good night.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history.